I was recently asked to recommend some Japanese Elvis singles and EPs, and that's what I'm going to do in this video. Probably the first single available to the Japanese public back in 1956 was Heartbreak Hotel, I Was the One, and I've got a couple of copies of that to show you. The covers are exactly the same. Lyrics on the back there, and the price 400 yen. In fact, the prices disappeared from covers in 1957 and didn't appear again until 1961. And you can see that these covers are wrapped in plastic. It's all part of the cover. And EPs were like this throughout the 1950s, and there were only two singles that were released this way, this one and Hound Dog. So the covers are the same, but the records are actually quite different, at least the center design. So this one here you can see has got this big hole in the middle. This is the first pressing from around about May 1956, I'm guessing. And the reason why singles had big holes in the middle is because RCA Victor in America invented them that way, complete with a record player with a great big thick tube in the middle of the turntable where you could stack all the singles. And the second version here, which will have come out mid to late 1956, looks like that with the tri-center design, and they used that design right the way through until 1972. And I suppose it makes more sense really to have singles, 78s and LPs all with that same design. So any record with this integrated plastic cover, they're all difficult to find in Japan, these Elvis ones from 56 to 58. There are a lot of Japanese singles that have completely different artwork to the American equivalent, and one of those to look out for is this one here, I Need Your Love Tonight, A Fool Such as I from 1959. And you can see it has this calendar design on the front there, and on the back it has the lyrics, and it also has the same information in Japanese that it has on the front. So on the calendar part at the front here, it has a lot of information in English. Elvis bought home for his family in Memphis, and Elvis records Hound Dog, etc. And the translations of those English sentences are all on the back here in Japanese, along with the English lyrics. And there are a couple of versions of this calendar sleeve. The first one, like this one here, it's actually laminated on the front. And if you've ever bought any Japanese singles, you'll know that basically the inserts are just thin pieces of paper. But this one here is actually laminated on the front, so it's quite hard wearing. There is another version of this one, a later version, which is not laminated. It's just the typical thin piece of paper. And they used that thin paper right up until 1971, when they started to use textured paper. In the early 60s in America, they brought out a few stereo singles, and they did the same in Japan as well. I think there are about half a dozen singles that they released in stereo, and all of them except one were also released in mono, of course. But this one here, this is Mexico, and You Can't Say No in Acapulco, was only released in stereo. It didn't really do much to help sales of it because it's quite a difficult one to find. And this one actually has a 4-page insert with lyrics on the inside. And just keep a mental note of this thing here, the bell mark, which you can see on the left side. I'll come back to that later on. Another thing you can keep an eye out for is RCA reissues from the early 70s. And an example I have here is Love Letters and Come What May. You can see the RCA logo at the top there, and it's very similar to the Victor release from 1966, with just minor changes to the logo, of course, and also the price down here and also at the front here. And this one here has a big center hole, so that tells you it's released after 1972, 72 or later. And Another thing about these orange releases is they all have this textured paper insert, which means that they all came out after 1971. So we looked at the earliest single release in Japan before, and this is the last commercially released single in Japan. Blue Suede Shoes and Promised Land. There were a couple of 7-inch promo only records which came out after this one, but this was the last commercially available one. And as usual, it had the lyrics on the back. And this is also interesting because it's the one and only colored vinyl single made in Japan, Elvis single, that is. And speaking of promo only releases, I've got one here to show you. This is Mama Liked the Roses and US Mail. And you could only get this single if you bought a box set. And you can see the name of the set there. I did a video about this a few months back. There's a box set called the Complete Singles. Really, really fine box set of singles. And this one you can see is also on that gold 50th anniversary label. So that was the only way to get this single, by buying that box set. There are many, many Elvis promos available from Japan, mostly white label releases, and I've got one to show you here. This is for Polk Salad Annie and I Just Can't Help Believing. And this single's worth having anyway, just as a unique coupling. Typical insert from the period. And here is the record, white label promo, I Just Can't Help Believing on one side and Polk Salad Annie on the other. There is actually another version of this promo with Elvis's version of Polk Salad Annie on one side and a Japanese comedian's version of it on the other side with completely different lyrics. One of the easiest EPs to find in Japan is the Follow That Dream EP. This sold very well back in 1962, and I've got a couple of different variants to show you. There's the label and the company sleeve, and on the back there, as ever, lyrics and a few Japanese notes. And just keep an eye on this bell mark here. You can see it's on the right. I explained in a previous video that the idea behind this bell mark was you just snip it off, send it away, and Victor would send money to schools to pay for sports facilities. And here's another version that I have. And if we just look at the back of this one, you'll see now that the bell mark has switched over to the left side. There is another slight difference here between these two. The first one that I showed at the top there, you can see that the colored strip at the top is sort of a pink color, whereas the one at the bottom is red. The red ones are far more common than the pink ones, but there are enough of these pink ones around to suggest that it wasn't just a printing error. It's not that difficult to find. And I mentioned the bell mark switching over to the left side, and it's not the case that all red inserts have the bell mark on the left. Very few have the bell mark on the left. Most of them have the bell mark on the right. And the reason why it's switched to the left is because of the Devil in Disguise single. So the Devil in Disguise single had a 4-page insert, just like the copy of Mexico I showed earlier. And so what that meant was they had to switch the bell mark over to the left side instead of it being on the right. If they left it on the right of a 4-page insert, it would have been in the middle. So they switched it to the left. So this actually tells you when this particular copy of Follow That Dream was released. This one here. So because the bell mark is over on the left, it dates from late 1963 or later. Late in 1963 came this EP here called Elvis's Hit Album. It was actually one of the last mono EPs. And it looks like Jailhouse Rock, but in actual fact, it is the Love Me Tender EP. And this was actually the first time that the Love Me Tender EP had been released in Japan, using the same songs as the American EP. There were two EPs called Love Me Tender back in the 50s, but they didn't have the same songs as this one here. Why they chose the Jailhouse Rock photo and why they called it Elvis Hit Album, I'm not sure. Although on the labels it does actually read Love Me Tender, Elvis's hit album. So from 1964, basically any new EP that came out was in stereo, and in many cases that meant reprocessed stereo, re-releases of earlier EPs. But in one case it was a true stereo release, and that is this one here, Tickle Me, using the artwork from the poster. This is a 5-song version, same as the American release, and this one is actually in true stereo. And if you ever find a Japanese version of the Tickle Me EP with the American cover, Japanese text but American cover picture, then you should grab it if it's not too expensive, because that particular version was only available at cinemas and it's unbelievably rare. In the mid-60s, they reissued a lot of records in completely new picture sleeves, and they called them the Presley Golden Compact Series, EPs as well as singles. And here is the one for Kid Galahad, and this has a slightly different cover to the original, which is here. This is actually a test pressing. I'll show you this in another video, but the front cover is the same as the regular version. So you can see they changed the cover slightly for the reissue. And this one's in mono and this one's in reprocessed stereo. There's the back cover. I'd like to do a comparison, but it's just getting too risky on YouTube to do videos like that now. With copyright claims and copyright strikes, it's just not worth the hassle, which is a shame. So yeah, the regular version with this cover here is quite easy to find, but this Golden Compact Series version, in fact all the records in this series, singles and EPs, are very, very hard to find. And the EPs also came with this lyric sheet here. In 1967, after the Easy Come, Easy Go EP was released, in Japan they released a series of half a dozen compilation EPs, and this is one of them here. This is called Love Me Tender, and each of them had the Japanese title or subtitle Elvis Presley Story, volume 1 to 6. This is number 2. This is probably the second easiest to find after one called Hound Dog, and they all came in these gatefold covers with lyrics etc. in the middle, and as usual the EPs were on this blue Victor Compact Double 33 label. There are a couple in that series that are very, very hard to find. They are California Holiday and Paradise Hawaiian Style. So by the time of Easy Come, Easy Go in America and Britain, the EP was pretty much dead in those countries, but in Japan it was still popular. And apart from the series of 6 EPs that I just showed, there were actually several more released in the early 70s. And I've got one here to show you here. This one is called Can't Help Falling in Love. Oh, this is Jailhouse Rock, actually. There is another one called Can't Help Falling in Love with a fairly similar cover. And the last 4 EPs all came with an obi, as you can see here. And great back cover photo there. And these are also gatefold sleeves. So the tracks on this one are Jailhouse Rock, Don't Be Cruel, Hound Dog, Heartbreak Hotel, and Love Me Tender. And there's the label. So there you go. That's a few recommended EPs and singles. There are lots more that I could recommend, but I'm going to have to leave it there for today. So thanks for watching, and until next time, take care. Cheers.